to do here for the next few minutes is answer a question that I received recently while doing one of my broadcasts. And the question was, how does a psychopath actually look at the world? What do they see? Now, the thing is, in my book series, Freedom from Conscience, the protagonist or anti-hero, Melanie, she provides a window for the reader to be able to see how a psychopath actually looks at the world. And so, if you get a chance, you can take a look. It's really quite interesting, and it's quite a bit deeper than I think most people think. I think a lot of times when you hear people talk about psychopaths, they're discussing it in a context of hurt. Usually, when you find YouTube videos, someone will put that up when they've been hurt by a psychopath. And obviously, they're going to want to portray such people in the most negative light. Now, I'm not going to sit here and present psychopaths as, the next best thing to Christmas or something like that. What I'd like to do, though, is at least show how they see, through their eyes, people and their environment. Now, first of all, I just want to point out, one of the things that distinguishes psychopaths, and when I hear people say, "Oh, I wonder if I'm a psychopath," and this is one of the first questions I ask them, is, do you feel empathy towards others? Can you put yourself in another person's shoes on a regular basis and actually really relate to where they're at and feel a great deal of connection to that person or their plight? Now, most people say, well, yeah, of course I do. And then I'll try to distinguish it from sympathy. Sympathy means like, you see someone break their leg and you're kind of like, wow, that really sucks. That's too bad they did that. I wish they hadn't. But empathy is far deeper, where you're actually maybe even feeling pain, maybe feeling discomfort for that person's plight. Now, the vast majority of people will say, of course I feel empathy on a regular basis. And for people other than just my most immediate loved ones. Well, that pretty much shoots down the idea you're a psychopath, okay? Because that's one of the big red flags, is not being able to feel empathy. Now, the other big red flag is guilt. Again, I was talking to someone the other day. He was like, well, sometimes I really relate to villains on TV, so I wonder if I'm a psychopath. And I said, well, when you do something wrong, how does it make you feel? Do you feel really bad? Does it kind of give you a bad feeling in your stomach? Do you feel remorse that just eats away at your conscience? Or do you feel it more like when something goes wrong, you feel disappointment that you didn't do something different because maybe you're having to suffer certain consequences for an action? Maybe, you get caught messing around on your girlfriend and she breaks up with you. Well, most people will say, no, I feel the first one. And that, again, the other big red flag. You're probably not a psychopath if you feel empathy and you feel guilty for doing things, that are wrong. Now, that's not to say that psychopaths are totally devoid of guilt and totally devoid of empathy, but it would be kind of like this analogy. When you're looking at your computer, when you're on Wi-Fi, maybe in some kind of remote area, and sometimes you have all those little bars lighting up, which means you have a good connection. Okay, the signal's going to come into your computer from the internet pretty good. But sometimes it's down to that one little minuscule bar, the little tiny one. Your internet is incredibly slow. Some things you can't actually bring up on the page. especially if they're really complicated. And that analogy really fits the way psychopaths are towards empathy and even sometimes guilt. So, yeah, they can feel it, but it's at such a diminished level, it's almost inconsequential. And often, if they're able to, the one distinguishing feature that a lot of people aren't aware of, that's been researched to prove this, is maybe what they're able to do also is able to turn it on or shut it off at will. So they can choose. Maybe they feel they're in a situation where maybe they should feel a little bit of empathy. And they can actually coax themselves into doing so. But now I want to deal then with what do you have when you have one of these individuals? And statistically, it's 3% of the male population, 1% of the female. But I think it's higher for females than 1%. I think ultimately we tend to see women in a different light, even when they do the same exact thing. Look at like murder trials. If a man and a woman are both arraigned for doing the same exact crime, invariably, the male is assigned such things as, oh, he was evil. Whereas, if he does something really nasty, evil, mean, cruel. Women, oh, she's at the worst disturbed. But what caused it? Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was, some sort of mistreatment she received. You see, it's still in society, we tend to look at the female as the victim and excuse her own center of control over her life. So I think ultimately, if in psychology, women doing the same thing or feeling the same thing that a man would, and he would get the label of psychopath, sometimes the woman gets a label of borderline. Perhaps there's been some research to suggest that some borderlines are actually psychopaths. Although it is borderlines tend to be very emotional, but still some of the other traits do overlap. Now, let's just say though, statistically, 3 out of 100 men and 1 out of 100 women. That means if you're in a room right now with a whole bunch of people, there's probably 1 or 2 psychopaths around there. So anyway, how do they see? Well, first of all, one thing that I think is somewhat troubling about psychopaths, especially the ones that make it big in politics, is that they, like all other people, believe that everyone thinks the way they do. Okay? Most regular people, they think that everyone cares. They see a politician talking about, the plight of unemployed people, or the plight of a endangered wildlife, or anything, and they even see him looking like they're going to cry, and they think that person must be feeling what I would feel in my heart. Well, not necessarily. Not all people think the way that you, the listener, are thinking. If a psychopath is really devoid of feeling guilt and empathy, they also will feel that other people are exactly the way they are. Now, many times psychopaths also think in a very Machiavellian manner. Even though this is distorting his quote, the ends justify the means. They see life as a cost-benefit analysis. If I do this, what do I get? If I do that, how will that affect my position in life? How will this cause people to like me, hate me? How will this cause someone to perhaps get a job, advance in their job? This is the way a psychopath is thinking all the time. But they also are going to have a certain level of paranoia because they think every single person is willing to do whatever it takes to succeed at whatever goal they choose. So the psychopath is going to be somewhat paranoid and have a negative view towards people. I heard somewhere, I haven't been able to find any study to verify it, but psychopaths, actually I did read, but I didn't actually look up the exact study. It was just a report in the press. that psychopaths are more likely, when asked, people that score high on psychopathic traits, it's a continuum. It's not like, yes, you are, red light. No, you're not, green light. It's more of a continuum along a spectrum. And the interesting thing is that people that score high on psychopathic traits tend to be very conservative when it comes to criminal justice issues. Now, you would think they'd be a little bit liberal, like, well, what if I get caught one of these days? No, actually, if they're projecting, they're thinking the criminal that got caught is going to have kind of that dark soul, that dark empathy that is often associated with psychopathy. And therefore, the psychopath is going to be more worried about letting them out on the street. Yeah, I mean, who knows how many district attorneys are actually psychopaths? And the reason why they're successful at what they do is because they are looking at themselves in the context of, what if that was me? What would I be saying right now? Well, of course I'd be saying this or doing that and trying to get off and playing on the sympathy of the jury. And maybe the DA, who might also be a psychopath, maybe as much psychopathic as the person that's being on the stand and being tried for whatever crime. So, that district attorney is going to want to make sure that person doesn't walk the streets. And so, again, if you're not acquainted with Machiavellianism, you need to look it up, because essentially that is how the psychopath thinks. So, does that mean they're calculating? Absolutely. Now, think of everything you do in life is calculating. There's one scene, some people have told me they really like it in my first book, and that's the first few pages where the main character is sitting and just, she's reflecting over when she was in high school, but she's like sitting in a school cafeteria in college or university. And she's analyzing the people around her, wondering what makes them tick. Who are they? What is their story? Much the same way that a person setting up an animal documentary might look upon the animals that they're filming. And this is the way a psychopath will think. Very analytical, very looking at people and trying to size them up. And I cannot say I can put my finger on exactly what it is in psychopathy that allows psychopaths, even though they're feeling very little emotion, to be able to really tap into other people's emotion. Okay, maybe it's an energy or something. Maybe sometimes you get negative, positive energy come together, and perhaps the person with negative energy is able to determine things that most people can't. But they're very good at knowing how people think, and therefore how people are feeling, and also how to connect to those feelings. Okay? Very important concept there. So this is why psychopaths make really, really, really good salespeople or spokespeople. Marketers. Wow, what better job is there? You're constantly trying to sell something. Maybe even police when it comes to detectives. Maybe that's a good area too. I would suspect it. I really like the TV series Sherlock. And the one thing I don't like, it's kind of cute, where he says, "I'm not a psychopath, I am a high-functioning sociopath." The thing is, I've dealt with this on previous shows, had experts point out there really is not any such thing as a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath in the strict psychological sense, okay? But let's just say Sherlock is a sociopath. Well, he's able to analyze and get into the mind of his opponents, and he sees them as opponents. It's like a game to him. So he wants to find a criminal. He is seeing this as a big chess game. So this is actually, I think it's a fairly good representation of how a psychopath, or like some people would say a sociopath, would see life and its challenges. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, does this mean that everyone who acts in a cold and detached way is a psychopath? No. I think that, like, for instance, I'm a big fan also of Walking Dead. And you see character development in many of the main characters that were in the show in the very first season. And they go from being nice to showing all the signs of psychopathy. And I think I suspect that's what they will do to the, quote, nice characters in Fear the Walking Dead. That as time goes on, if they survive these characters, then they'll have them develop more and more psychopathy, which I guess would go into, I can't remember his name, it's a long Polish name, but he wrote the book about panorology, that when psychopaths control a situation, the people around them become like secondary psychopaths. They start adopting psychopathic ways of behaving. But ultimately, I think that psychopaths are actually born that way. They're not. And then their environment will determine which direction they take. So anyway, another aspect that's very important, other than the Machiavellianism, is they do not respect authority in the least. Now, that doesn't mean they may not agree with authority. They may be the most loyal person to their boss or to their religion that you'll ever encounter. But that loyalty is more, if I'm going to use an analogy, I would say they're more like cats rather than dogs when it comes to loyalty. I personally think cats are very psychopathic, ultimately. But your relationship with a cat is sort of on its own terms. Sometimes it'll just come up and be very affectionate, and you're like, oh, I love my kitty, and then it'll bite you and then run off because it's had enough. Dogs, you can treat them really horribly, and they will still be loyal to you to the very end. And ultimately, psychopaths, I think, are more like cats. And I think it's ironic that many people in society just adore cats, just the same way as many people adore psychopaths. So when they're on TV shows and stuff like that, like I said, Sherlock, I think he's a good example. James Bond, archetypical example. And there's a few others I won't go into right now, but essentially, people like it. There's something dark about them. They're willing to do what they want and get away with it. And humans like that to a large degree, but most people have too much guilt and too much empathy to do it themselves. But anyway, the thing is that when it comes to their view of society, and I had a guest on a while back that said that maybe this explains why many people are very heroic and also psychopathic. They look at rules as something they evaluate constantly. What's the cost and what's the benefit of following that rule? Will this make me a happier person if I follow this rule? They will not just adopt it. And if they feel that there's too much of a punishment if they break the rule, they'll find a way that they won't get caught. So they're thrill seekers to a large degree. Oh, there's a rule against this. I wonder if I can get away with it. Let's see. And that's how they see authority. Okay? Now, if they're authority, watch out. Again, like I said earlier, they project out their feelings, feeling like everyone is the same way. So they don't trust people so much. And, they're thinking, okay, well, gotta be firm, gotta be strict, like a leader. Hammer people down when they misbehave. So, ultimately, again, the person who has psychopathic tendencies, ultimately, the person that has these traits will tend to question authority a lot, which often makes them very dynamic. People like people who are willing to buck the system. And so this has an attractive energy about them. But they also realize how to do it and get away with it. How to be able to get around rules. So, maybe this is one reason why you might find a lot of lawyers. But also they're very analytical. And so ultimately, too, since you can combine trying to get to the root of something with a very low level of empathy, which often empathy clouds our vision. Actually, I will point this out. I just read recently a study that indicated that people with high empathy tend to be a little, more violent than people with low levels of empathy. But anyway, that's going to be another show in the future. But the thing is, emergency room doctors tend to be more likely, there's a higher level of psychopaths in that profession than in the general population. And maybe it's because they, like I use example Sherlock, are looking at everything as a challenge, and they want to find out what they can do, and they want to prove themselves, and maybe gain a little bit of attention, a little bit of honor, a little bit of praise, because ultimately that will feed into the narcissistic aspect of psychopathy. And yeah, psychopaths have a high level of feeling that they are somewhat the center of the universe. When they walk in the room, they tend to let everyone know that they are the center. So again, this is not a discussion in how to spot a psychopath. It is more like how to understand them and how to, at least, dare I say, have a little empathy for people with psychopathy. At least maybe now you'll understand your politicians a little bit more. I'd like to encourage people to visit my website at michaelcross.net, or if you want to see or hear past shows that we've done, you can visit my YouTube station at Michael Cross, and it's the one where when you type it in, it'll state Freedom from Conscience, my book series. To distinguish from many of the other Michael Crosses, it seems to be a fairly common name. Anyway, that's all for this evening, and thank you for tuning in, and hope you come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
Bernays was constantly marinating Freud's ideas. They both knew propaganda worked, and they loved experimenting and trying new grandiose projects. I had heard that before from someone that looked at people as animals, and they could be experimented with. George Soros, listen to this.
When you try to, improve society, you affect different people and different interests differently. So you very often have all kinds of unintended adverse consequences. So I had to experiment. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.